This is my true story. I am an old man now, but I still remember the night my own daughter betrayed me. I raised her, loved her, sacrificed everything for her, and yet she turned her back on me when I needed her the most. She threw my clothes outside in the freezing cold and locked the door on me as if I were nothing. But I did not stay silent. I gave her back the pain she gave me. Before I tell you how, comment below where you are watching from and subscribe for more of my stories. I was a young man once, strong and filled with dreams, but none of those dreams were bigger than the hope I carried for my daughter. When she was born, I looked at her tiny hands and made a silent promise to give her everything I could. I worked long hours, sometimes leaving before the sun came up and returning long after it went down, just so she could have a roof over her head and food on her plate. While others spent their earnings on comforts, I saved every coin for her future. I often wore the same pair of shoes until the soles gave out, but I made sure she had warm coats, soft shoes, and books for school. My joy came not from what I owned, but from what she received. That was my devotion, pure, quiet, and unwavering. When she was a little girl, she would run to me after school with her arms wide open, and her laughter would wash away the fatigue from my body. I would lift her high into the air and spin her around, forgetting the aches of the day. Many times, I went without lunch just so I could save enough to buy her favorite toys. On cold nights, when there was only one heavy blanket in the house, I gave it to her and wrapped myself in an old coat instead. She never knew how many sacrifices I made because I wanted her childhood to feel light and free. I wanted her to believe the world was safe, even if my shoulders carried the weight of every hardship. There were winters when I worked outside in biting wind, my hands cracked and bleeding because every dollar mattered. I remember hiding my pain when she asked me why my hands looked so rough. I would simply smile and say, "It's from working hard," though I never told her how much I endured just so she could live in warmth. When other men sat in taverns drinking, I sat at the table balancing bills and writing down expenses, always making sure her school fees came first. Her happiness was the measure of my success. I told myself that as long as she was smiling, all the struggles were worth it. And for many years, I believed that love and devotion were enough to hold us together forever. I bought her clothes that were far finer than anything I owned. She wore bright dresses, while I patched my shirts over and over until the fabric could no longer hold stitches. When she wanted to learn music, I worked extra shifts and carried heavy loads until my back screamed with pain, just so I could pay for her lessons. The sound of her playing was my reward. I never envied her youth or her freedom. I felt proud that I could give her chances I never had. Every choice I made, every coin I spent, every step I took, it was all for her. I wanted her to look at me one day and say, "My father gave me everything he could." That was the hope that fueled me through every storm. During festivals, when neighbors dressed in new clothes, I walked in old, faded ones, but my daughter sparkled like a star. People praised her beauty and grace, and though my wallet was empty, my heart felt rich. I believed that my sacrifices were an investment in love, that one day she would see the depth of what I had given and carry it forward with kindness. I thought that if I gave her everything, she would give back even a fraction of the respect I poured into her life. It never crossed my mind that devotion could be forgotten, or worse, repaid with cruelty. Back then, I lived only for her comfort, blind to the truth that love does not always return in the way it is given. I built a small home brick by brick, often after long shifts when my body wanted nothing more than rest. I laid each stone thinking about her safety, her future, her happiness. The walls I raised were meant to protect her from the harshness of the world. When rain leaked through the roof, I climbed up with trembling hands to fix it, never letting her see how afraid I was of falling. She thought the house was strong because it never failed her, but it was strong because I refused to fail her. My sweat was in those walls, my heart in that roof, my soul in every corner. And when she smiled within those walls, I believed my life had meaning. There were nights when my stomach growled from hunger because I gave her the last piece of bread. I remember watching her eat, feeling content even as my own hunger burned inside me. A father's devotion does not measure itself in comfort but in sacrifice. I chose to live with less so she could live with more. I thought this was the way love was supposed to be. Silent, selfless, and endless. Each time I walked to work with worn-out shoes, each time I denied myself something small, each time I kept silent about my pain, it was for her. I gave without asking. I loved without condition. And in my heart, I believed that kind of devotion could never be broken. When she grew older, I supported every dream she had. If she wanted to study, I found a way. If she wanted to travel, I saved until my hands shook counting coins. She never saw the sleepless nights, the worries about money, the aching bones after labor. She only saw her father standing strong, ready to give her whatever she needed. And I wanted it that way. I wanted her to see me as unshakable, even when I was trembling inside. For years, this was my devotion. To be the silent shield, the invisible hand, the endless provider. I gave her everything, and I asked for nothing but respect in return. This was my devotion. Thousands of sacrifices sewn together into a life of love. I believed my daughter would always see me as her protector, her guide, her father. I thought devotion like mine would never be forgotten. But devotion, as I learned, can be thrown away as easily as old clothes. Still, before the cruelty, before the betrayal, there was only this: a father who gave everything he had, everything he was, for the happiness of his child. That was me. That was my life. That was my devotion. At first, the change was small, almost invisible, like a shadow creeping in at the edge of a bright day. My daughter, who once ran to greet me at the door, began walking past me without a smile. She no longer sat beside me at dinner. Instead, she stayed in her room with her phone, her friends, or her thoughts. I told myself it was only youth, a stage of growing, nothing more. Children change as they grow, I said. But deep inside, I felt something slipping away. The closeness we once had was fading, and I could not grasp it no matter how hard I tried. It was as if the love I poured into her life was becoming invisible to her eyes. She started to speak to me less. Where once there were long stories about her day, there were now only short answers. Yes. No. Fine. The house that used to ring with her laughter grew quiet, and in that silence, I felt older, weaker. I would sit in the chair, waiting to hear her footsteps, waiting to hear her voice, but sometimes hours passed, and she never came. My devotion had not changed, but her attention to me had. I kept asking myself, did I do something wrong? I searched my memories for mistakes, for words I might have said, for times I might have failed. But all I found were sacrifices, love, and care. Still, the distance grew wider. There were evenings when she came home later than usual, and when I asked where she had been, she looked at me with irritation, as if my concern was a burden. Once, she even rolled her eyes at me, and the pain of that simple gesture cut deeper than any wound my body had ever known. I had carried bricks, bent my back under heavy loads, but the weight of that cold glance was heavier than all of it. I reminded myself that she was young, that she was finding her own path. But no matter how much I tried to explain it to my heart, the sting remained. The bond between us was not as strong as before. Something was changing, and I could not stop it. Birthdays came and went with less warmth. In earlier years, she would hug me, thank me, and laugh with me as we cut the cake. But now, she looked at her phone more than she looked at me. Sometimes, she did not even eat the cake I bought with my hard-earned money. Once, I waited the whole evening with a small gift for her, but she never came home. I sat by the table until midnight, the gift untouched, the candle burned low. I told myself, she must be busy. But the truth was simple. She no longer cared the way she once did, and I, the father who gave her everything, was slowly becoming invisible in her life. I began to notice how she spoke of me to others. In front of her friends, she did not mention the sacrifices I had made. Instead, she seemed embarrassed by me, by my old clothes, my tired face, my simple ways. Once, I overheard her telling a friend, "My father doesn't understand modern things." That sentence pierced me like a knife. I was not angry that she saw me as old. I was heartbroken that she no longer respected the life I had given for her. Respect was all I ever wanted, and slowly, even that began to disappear. The distance was not only in her words or her actions, but in the very air between us. It was growing colder each day. I tried to close the gap. I asked her about her dreams, her studies, her friends. She replied with short sentences, sometimes not even looking at me. I offered to help her, but she waved me off. When I gave her advice, she sighed as if my words were useless. The more I reached out, the more she pulled away. It was like chasing a bird that had already flown from its cage. No matter how much I stretched my hand, I could not bring her back. My heart ached, but I told myself I had to be patient. I believed my love would bring her close again. Yet, each day she walked farther from me, and I was powerless to stop it. There were times when she even avoided sitting in the same room as me. She would eat quickly, then leave. She would watch television alone in her room, instead of with me in the living room. The small conversations we once had turned into silence. And in that silence, my mind filled with questions. Did she forget everything I did for her? Did she not see the nights I stayed awake so she could sleep peacefully? Did she not remember the sacrifices I made, the clothes I mended, the meals I gave up? My devotion had not lessened, but her care for me had faded like a picture left too long in the sun. It was the beginning of a loneliness I had never known before. The first signs of distance were not loud or dramatic. They were small, quiet, and painful in their simplicity. A missed smile, an ignored question, a forgotten hug. But those small cracks widened with time until they became deep walls between us. I still loved her. I still devoted myself to her, but I began to realize love alone cannot hold back the tide of change. What once was closeness became distance. What once was warmth became coldness. And as I sat in my chair at night, listening to the empty silence of the house, I knew a storm was coming. I could feel it in my bones. The devotion I gave might not be enough to keep her by my side. It was a winter evening, the kind of night when the wind bites at your skin and every breath feels heavy with frost. I had just returned from a short walk, carrying some bread and milk. My hands were stiff from the cold, but my heart felt warm because I believed my daughter would greet me when I entered. Instead, I saw her standing at the door with my clothes in her hands. At first, I thought she was bringing them in to fold, but her eyes told another story. They were sharp, full of something I had never seen before: contempt. Before I could ask why, she stepped outside, and with one cruel motion, she threw my clothes into the snow. I froze, not because of the weather, but because of the shock. My shirts, the ones I had worn for years, the ones patched with care, now lay scattered on the ground like trash. My trousers, my coat, even the blanket I used on cold nights, all of it landed in the icy dirt. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask her what she was doing, but she had already shut the door. The sound of the lock clicking was louder than the winter wind. I stood there, staring at the closed door, feeling like a stranger in my own home. My heart pounded, as if it wanted to burst from the pain. She had not only locked me out of the house, she had locked me out of her heart. The cold quickly began to seep through my thin shirt. The snow melted on my clothes, soaking them until they clung to my skin like ice. I bent down to pick up a sweater, but my hands shook too much to hold it. I remembered how many winters I had worked outside so she could stay warm inside. I remembered the nights when I tucked her into bed with thick blankets while I sat awake by the fire with none for myself. Now, in return, she left me standing in the freezing dark. The frost cut into my bones, but the deeper pain came from her cruelty. I felt abandoned, not only as a father, but as a human being. From inside the house, I heard laughter. Not the laughter of joy we once shared, but laughter that mocked me. It was her voice, mixed with someone else's, ridiculing me, calling me old, calling me useless. Every word carried through the walls, piercing me like knives. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass of the window, hoping she would see me, hoping she would remember who I was. But she never came to open the door. The one who once cried in my arms as a child now left me to cry alone in the night. The betrayal burned more than the winter air, and I felt a loneliness I had never known before. The longer I stood outside, the weaker my body grew. My legs trembled, my breath came out in white clouds, and I felt my fingers going numb. I wrapped my arms around myself, but the shivering would not stop. In that moment, I thought of the countless times I had sacrificed so she could live without suffering. I thought of the money I had spent on her comfort while I walked in worn shoes. I thought of how I went hungry some nights so she could eat. And now she had thrown me out as if I were nothing but a burden. My sacrifices were forgotten, my love discarded. I felt smaller than the snowflakes falling around me. Neighbors passed by, some glancing in my direction, some pretending not to see. Shame covered me like another layer of cold. I wanted to shout, to tell them I was her father, that I had given her everything, that I did not deserve this. But no sound came out. My voice was trapped in my throat, strangled by heartbreak. The humiliation burned inside me, mixing with the cold to create a pain I cannot describe. I picked up one of my shirts from the snow and held it against my chest, but it gave no warmth. The house I had once built with pride had turned into a prison that rejected me, and the daughter I had raised with devotion had become my jailer. The frost deepened as the night grew darker. My body stiffened, my teeth chattered uncontrollably, and I felt as though even the moonlight pitied me. I tried to knock on the door once more, hoping she would reconsider, but no one answered. I called out her name, but the only reply was the wind howling through the trees. My knees finally gave way, and I sat on the icy steps, holding my head in my hands. The cold stone beneath me seemed to draw every ounce of strength I had left. I remembered how I once carried her on these very steps, small and sleepy, wrapped in blankets. And now, here I was, sitting on the same steps, rejected, shivering, broken. The cruel act was not only in her throwing my clothes or locking me out. The true cruelty was in her heart, which had hardened against me. The father who once was her protector had become her victim. The man who gave her life had been treated as though his life had no value. I realized then that her love for me had died long before this night. This act was not sudden. It was the final strike after years of distance. And as the cold surrounded me, I understood that something inside me had frozen as well. A bond had been shattered beyond repair. My heart cracked in silence, and though I breathed, I felt as if a part of me had already died in the frost. That night, after being locked out and humiliated, I sat quietly under the shadow of the porch, staring into the cold darkness. I was too weak to stand, too broken to fight, and too lost to know what to do. My body shivered uncontrollably, but my mind wandered through memories. I thought about the days when I used to walk miles just to bring her food, the times when I stayed up all night working so she could sleep peacefully, the years I had given without asking for anything in return. As the cold wrapped around me, I asked myself why love had turned into cruelty. I remembered her childhood nights when she would run to me after a nightmare, clinging to my chest until she felt safe. I was her shield, her comfort, her protector. My arms once carried her through storms, both real and in her dreams. I would sit by her bed, stroking her hair until she drifted off to sleep. Every sacrifice I made then felt worth it, because I believed she would always know my love. But now, as I sat freezing in the dark, I wondered if all those moments meant nothing to her anymore. It felt as though my devotion had been erased, like chalk washed away by rain. I thought about the promises she once made, saying she would take care of me when I grew old, that she would never let me suffer. She said those words with sincerity when she was young, and I had believed them. Now, those promises felt like ashes scattered in the wind. She had chosen to throw me outside instead of giving me shelter. The betrayal cut deeper because it came from the very person I had trusted most. If it had been a stranger, I could have walked away. But when it is your own blood, the wound never closes. It stays raw, reminding you of everything you lost. The silence of the night pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. No words were exchanged between us, but silence itself screamed the truth, that I was no longer wanted. It was in that silence that I realized something important. I could no longer beg for her love or her respect. Love cannot be forced, and dignity cannot be surrendered. I had carried her burdens for years, but now I carried only the weight of my broken heart. My tears froze on my cheeks, but my soul began to harden like ice. I promised myself in that quiet moment that I would not bow anymore. I remembered the warmth of her smile when she was a little girl, the way she would laugh when I lifted her onto my shoulders. That memory used to bring me joy, but tonight it brought me pain. It reminded me of a time when love was pure and unconditional. Somewhere along the way, that love had died, replaced with selfishness and arrogance. I wondered where I had gone wrong as a father, whether I had given too much or too little. But deep down, I knew the truth. Love should not be measured by mistakes. Love should endure. If hers could not, then it was never the love I thought it was. As I sat there, my body numb, I thought about my sacrifices more deeply. I had given her my youth, my energy, my money, my health. Every decision I made was for her future. I denied myself pleasures, ignored my own dreams, and wore clothes until they tore, just so she could wear new ones. And yet, here I was, thrown out in the cold, wearing clothes soaked in snow. The irony stabbed at me. I realized that sometimes love blinds us to the truth, that not everyone we give to will give back. I had spent my life pouring water into her cup, but when my cup was empty, she refused to fill it. That night of silence taught me a lesson I should have learned long ago. Sacrifice without appreciation turns into chains, and I had worn those chains for too long. I had lived hoping that my love would be enough to hold her heart close, but hearts cannot be bound by sacrifice. They must be bound by gratitude. As I reflected in the freezing air, I accepted the harsh truth. She was no longer the daughter I had raised. She had chosen cruelty over kindness, pride over compassion, and in that moment, my love for her did not die, but my dependence on her did. I would no longer beg. I would no longer wait. I would rise, not as her father seeking her affection, but as a man reclaiming his dignity. When the storm of that night settled inside me, I began to notice something else: the wedding preparations in the house. My daughter was planning her big day. Everywhere I looked, I saw decorations, lists, and excited whispers about dresses, flowers, and celebrations. It was clear this wedding was the center of her world, her proudest moment, her stage to shine in front of everyone. I watched silently, and the more I saw, the more I understood. Her pride was tied to that wedding, her entire image wrapped in that single dress she guarded like treasure. And in that moment, I knew what had to be done. The dress arrived a few days later, carried with care, placed in a protective cover, and hung in a place where no harm could come to it. She treated it as if it were a crown, as if the fabric itself carried all her worth. I remembered then how she had thrown my clothes into the dirt without care, how she mocked me while I shivered. The comparison burned in my mind, her dress wrapped in safety, my clothes abandoned to the cold. It was then that my heart stopped waiting for her kindness. I realized she valued fabric more than flesh, pride more than parent. Every night, I sat and thought about the weight of that dress, not the fabric, but what it symbolized. It was her joy, her pride, her identity, and her story to the world. Without it, her day would not shine. Without it, her pride would crumble. The more I thought, the clearer it became. This was not about revenge born out of anger. It was about balance. She had shown me what my worth was to her by throwing away my clothes. Now, I would show her what her pride meant to me. It was not cruelty. It was a lesson carved into action. I began to observe her carefully. She would check the dress every day, smoothing its cover, adjusting the hanger, smiling at it as though it were alive. It became obvious that it was more than fabric to her. It was her dream, her shield against judgment, her proof to the world that she was perfect. And I thought to myself, if she could strip me of dignity by tossing my clothes into the dirt, then I will strip her of the pride she guards so fiercely. My heart did not beat with hatred, but with clarity. I had no intention of arguing anymore. My silence would become my sharpest weapon. That clarity became my turning point. I stopped asking questions. I stopped hoping she would change. I stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. Instead, I focused on what I could control: my response. The wedding dress became the mirror of my pain. Where my torn clothes symbolized my humiliation, her perfect dress symbolized her pride. By removing hers, as she had removed mine, I would restore the balance. Not because I wanted to destroy her, but because I wanted her to understand the weight of cruelty. My revenge was not about destruction. It was about reflection. I thought of the many nights I gave her warmth while I froze in silence. I thought of the many mornings I gave her food while I worked hungry. I thought of all the birthdays, the school events, the sacrifices. And then I thought of how easily she had thrown me aside like garbage. It was that memory that fueled my resolve. I would no longer suffer quietly. If she could teach me through cruelty, then I would teach her through consequence. My mind was made up. I no longer saw myself as weak, broken, or unwanted. I saw myself as a man reclaiming his voice without words. And so, the turning point was not just about the dress. It was about me. It was about breaking free from the chains of dependence and silence. For the first time in years, I felt power in my veins. Not the power of anger, but the power of decision. She had shown me that kindness could be mocked, but dignity could not be taken unless I surrendered it. I would not surrender anymore. I would act. And when I did, she would finally learn that a father's silence was never weakness. It was the calm before the storm. After the turning point came the plan. I did not rush, for I knew haste would weaken the impact. I watched the dress as one would watch a flame in the dark. Every day it hung there, shielded by plastic, untouched by dust or dirt, protected as though it were a piece of treasure from heaven. My daughter checked on it constantly, her eyes glowing with pride, as if the dress itself was her crown. To her, the dress was not clothing. It was power. It was status. It was her story to the world. And that made it the perfect mirror for my pain. I remembered the winter night when she threw my clothes into the cold dirt. I remembered shivering with nothing to cover me while she laughed and locked the door. That memory did not fade. It grew sharper each time I saw her precious dress hanging safely inside. The contrast cut into me like a blade. She had stripped me of warmth, and yet guarded her own garment as if it held her life. That image would not leave me. And so, my plan grew stronger. It was not about the fabric. It was about balance. She had stolen my dignity. I would return the lesson by striking at her pride. I thought carefully about timing. I could not act too early, or the act would not hold its weight. I could not act too late, or the damage would be repairable. The perfect time was close to the wedding, when the dress mattered most, when it was no longer just fabric, but the symbol of her identity in front of hundreds of eyes. That was when her heart would be tied most tightly to it. That was when its loss would cut deepest. I decided I would wait, patient as a hunter, until the moment was right. Every night, while she slept, I would pass by the place where the dress hung. I studied it. I studied the lock on the door, the way she placed it, the way she covered it. It was almost as though she knew its importance and feared the world might touch it. She guarded it as fiercely as she had dismissed me. And as I watched, I realized something powerful. The dress was more than fabric. It was her shield against judgment. It was the one thing that gave her confidence. Without it, she would stand exposed. Without it, she would feel what I had felt, stripped, vulnerable, humiliated. The plan was simple in my heart, though heavy in meaning. I would take the dress and I would throw it away just as she had thrown away my clothes. I would not hide it. I would not burn it. I would not cut it. I would do exactly as she had done to me. I would put it out in the cold, where the earth and frost would claim it, where others could see it discarded, where it would lose all its power. It was not the destruction of the fabric that mattered. It was the destruction of the pride that surrounded it. But this was not just about revenge. It was about reflection. When she saw her dress gone, when she realized it was thrown away without thought, perhaps she would remember the night she locked me out. Perhaps she would finally understand the cruelty of that moment, the cruelty of throwing away a man who had given his life for her. My act was not born of hatred. It was born of balance. I wanted her to feel, even if only once, the same sharp sting she had made me feel. That sting was not about clothes, it was about worth. And so, I prepared. I made no noise, no complaints, no accusations. I lived quietly, speaking less, watching more. On the outside, I was the same old man, silent, patient, worn. But inside, I was sharper than ever. My silence became my weapon, my calm became my armor. Each day that passed brought me closer to the act that would speak louder than any words I could ever say. I was not planning destruction. I was planning revelation, and when it came, she would not be able to ignore it. She would have no choice but to face the reflection of her own cruelty. The day finally came. I had waited with patience for weeks, letting the memory of that cold night rest in my mind. I had watched her walk past the dress with pride, untouched, guarded like treasure. She spoke to me less now, her words clipped, her eyes colder, as though my silence was a wound she could not name. I did not speak to her about my plan. I kept it to myself, quietly storing it like a secret that would one day speak for me. That day was today. The moment felt heavy. The house was quiet, the air still. I moved slowly toward the bedroom where the dress hung. My hands trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of what I was about to do. The dress gleamed under the dim light, its white fabric shimmering like snow. It was beautiful. It was her dream. And in that beauty lay the cruelty that had been shown to me. I touched the plastic covering, feeling the shape beneath, the promise of joy it carried for her. I knew this act would break her pride in a way words never could. I looked around first, making sure no one was watching. I knew she would be at her final preparations for the wedding, that she would be distracted with guests, with flowers, with music. That was the perfect moment, when her heart was full of joy, her mind full of celebration, her guard down. I slipped my fingers under the cover and pulled it away slowly. The dress shone in the light like a promise kept. My fingers rested on it, feeling the delicate fabric, the lace, the silk. This was her treasure, and it would be mine to alter her path forever. I lifted the dress carefully, not out of mercy, but out of respect for the lesson it carried. It was a symbol of her day, her pride, her joy. I carried it quietly, walking past the rooms where laughter once lived, past walls that had heard years of my own voice asking for warmth and respect. I carried it outside without a sound. The cold air bit my skin, but I did not notice. I was not thinking of comfort. I was thinking of balance, of justice. The dress was no longer hers to guard. It was a mirror for her own cruelty. When I reached the cold earth, I let the dress fall. It landed with a soft but final sound, its folds spreading across the frost. The plastic ripped slightly, letting the fabric kiss the ground. It was no longer a garment of joy. It was a garment of silence, a statement louder than any shouting could ever be. I stepped back and looked at it lying there. I felt no satisfaction in cruelty, only peace in the act of balance. The world was quiet around me. Even the wind seemed to stop. My heart was steady. I had spoken without words. I did not hide. I did not flee. I stood there and let the cold touch me as it touched the dress. I knew she would find out soon. I knew her scream would come. But I was not afraid. I had given her time to see the truth herself. This was not an attack. This was a lesson in return. It was her lesson, carved quietly into the world without noise or violence. The dress was gone, just as my clothes had been gone in the winter. And now, she would understand what loss truly meant. I turned back toward the house with slow steps. My heart felt strangely light. I did not feel rage. I felt closure. I had done what I knew I must. I had made my move with patience, precision, and without bitterness. When she found the dress missing, she would feel the weight of her own actions. That weight would be heavier than my silence. I would let her own mind give her the answer. I would not speak of it. My act was my voice, and it would speak for years. The silence after the act was deep. I stood there quietly, watching the dress lie in the cold where I had left it. Inside the house, she was preparing for her wedding day. The air was filled with music, laughter, and voices, none of them knowing what had happened outside. I stayed where I was for a while, breathing the cold air. My chest felt heavy, but my mind was still. I knew she would find the dress soon. I knew that when she did, the world would change for her in that moment. It was not long before she noticed. At first, there was confusion. A quick search, a loud voice calling her name. Then shock. She ran outside, her laughter turning to panic. I heard her steps on the porch, then the gasp when she saw the dress. Her eyes widened, her mouth opened, and no words came. She stood there for a moment, looking at the folds of silk on the frost, and then the cry came. It was sharp, cutting through the quiet morning. It was not just anger, it was pain, pride wounded deeply. Neighbors began to notice. Their whispers spread across the street. Friends who came to the house for the wedding began to ask what had happened. Her voice rang out in confusion, anger, and disbelief. I stayed silent. I knew nothing I said could undo what was done. I let her stand there, surrounded by relatives, her hands trembling, her face pale. The wedding plans were forgotten for a moment. The world had narrowed down to the dress in the cold and the man who had thrown it away. Some of her friends tried to speak to me. They asked questions softly, but I did not answer. I knew the answers were not in words. I let her confusion grow. She came to the door and looked at me. Her eyes were filled with tears now, not from joy, but from the sharp ache of betrayal. She did not speak. She could not. Her hands shook as she pointed toward the house. I nodded silently. She knew then it was not about the dress. It was about something much deeper, something I had carried for years in silence. Neighbors whispered in hushed voices. Some pitied her. Some admired the quiet strength of my act. Others wondered if I had gone too far. I did not care what they thought. I knew I had done what I had to do. My dignity had been stripped away before, when she threw my clothes into the cold. This was not revenge born of hate. It was a lesson born of years of silence, of patience, and of hurt. I had given her a memory she would never forget. That was enough for me. Inside, the wedding was now in disorder. Guests murmured quietly, unsure if they should speak. The flowers remained untouched. The music paused. The moment had shifted. Her pride, her joy, her celebration, all had vanished in the cold air outside. She came toward me again, her voice low and shaking. I looked away. I knew my silence was the answer. I did not need to explain. My act had spoken. I turned and walked slowly toward my own room, letting her stand there with the truth she had earned. Later, I heard her crying. It was not loud, but it reached me. The sound was not just for the dress. It was for the years of trust she had broken, for the distance she had built, for the silence she could no longer ignore. I lay down in my own bed that night, feeling neither victory nor regret. I felt peace. I had said what I could not speak. I had acted where words had failed. The world outside remained quiet, but inside me, there was a sense of closure I had not felt in years. After that night, I woke up with quietness inside me. The house was still, as if the world was holding its breath. My mind was no longer restless. I felt something I had not felt for years. Peace. It was not loud peace. It was quiet, steady, deep. I sat on my bed for a long time, looking at the morning light through the window. I thought of the years, the sacrifices, and the cold that had pierced my bones. Now, something had shifted. I understood that peace was not given, it was taken. I walked through the house slowly that day. I did not go looking for her or speak her name. I let her space remain filled with her own thoughts. The living room felt different now. The air had changed. I could hear the quiet whispers of the neighbors outside. They spoke softly, unsure whether to step in or stay away. I did not care. I had learned that peace was not found in the noise of explanations. Peace lived in the silence of truth. My mind went back to her wedding day. She had dreamt of that day for years. She had planned every detail, but she never thought the day would carry such weight, such lessons. I did not destroy her joy for myself. I destroyed it for her to see what it meant to take lightly the heart of another. That day would remain in her memory forever, not for the beauty of her dress, but for the weight of what she had done. I knew peace was born in that quiet understanding. I began to live differently. I stopped chasing apologies. I stopped waiting for her to see me again, as she once had. I moved through my days with quiet dignity. I went to the garden in the morning. I sat on the porch in the evening. I let the seasons pass over me without complaint. I found comfort in the small things: a cup of tea, the quiet rustle of leaves, the feel of the earth beneath my feet. Peace became my home. Neighbors began to notice the change. They saw me walk slowly, but with a steady pace. They saw me smile softly, at nothing in particular. Some came to speak to me. I spoke little, but I listened deeply. They began to understand something I could not say in words: that peace was not just the absence of noise, but the presence of acceptance. I learned to live without anger. I learned to live without her. Sometimes I saw her. From a distance, in the street or at the market. Her eyes avoided mine. I did not seek her out. I let her be. My peace depended on letting go completely. I understood then that letting go was not weakness. It was strength. It was the ability to carry your dignity without clinging to the past. And my dignity was no longer tied to her or her choices. It was mine alone. At night, I lay quietly, without bitterness or regret. The bed was my own now, and my sleep was undisturbed. I let the past rest where it belonged. My heart was lighter, even though it still carried memories of cold nights and broken trust. I knew peace was not forgetting. It was remembering without pain. I closed my eyes and let silence speak to me. In that silence, I found peace. Now, as an old man, I sit quietly and tell this story. I speak without anger, without shame, without bitterness. My voice carries calm, because I have lived long enough to know that peace comes from letting go, not holding on. I have learned that dignity is not given. It is earned through choices made in silence. My choice was simple. I let her go. I let her carry her pride. I kept my peace. I think of the wedding ring she threw away, and the name I erased from every paper she owned. Those were acts born of pain, yes, but also acts of teaching. I taught her without words. I taught her that respect cannot be taken for granted, that love is a fragile thing, and trust is more precious than gold. My actions spoke louder than any argument could. They were my final voice in the quiet room of our broken home. Looking back now, I see the years differently. I see the sacrifices, the struggles, the quiet mornings and long nights. I see the way I loved without asking for recognition. I see how I walked beside her once and how she walked away. I understand now that life teaches us lessons not through words, but through experience. And my lesson was clear. Dignity matters more than possession, and peace matters more than pride. I speak to the younger men now when they ask about marriage. I tell them quietly, without preaching, that love is not a possession. It is a gift, and it must be treated with care. I tell them that vows are not just words spoken on a day of joy. They are promises to be kept through hardship. I tell them that respect is not given automatically. It is earned every day. My own story becomes my warning and my guide. I have found that telling this story is also part of my healing. Each time I speak it aloud, I remind myself why I chose peace over anger, silence over shouting. I remind myself that I walked away not because I was weak, but because I was strong enough to let go. I remind myself that the dignity I saved was worth every tear shed in that quiet battle of hearts. My voice is calm now because I have made my peace complete. I know some will judge my choice. They will say I should have fought harder. They will say I should have spoken louder. But I have learned that some fights are not meant to be won with noise, but with quiet resolve. The greatest victory is in preserving your own dignity. And the greatest peace is in knowing you gave love and respect without asking for it in return. I have won that peace, and I carry it with me. Now in my last years, I see that my story is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has loved and lost, to anyone who has faced betrayal and chosen peace. My ring was thrown away, my name erased, my home broken, yet my heart is whole. I walk quietly, I speak softly, and I live fully. My final thought is simple. She took my ring and threw it away. I took her name and let her go, and I found peace in silence.